All right. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us, everyone. My name is Adam Nordell. Um, I am a campaign manager here at Defend Our Health. I'm based in Maine, and I apologize for our several minute late start this afternoon, but we've got a good hour ahead of us, and we're looking forward to spending it with you. This is the inaugural Authors and Friends webinar. Defend Our Health is pleased to partner with Island Press to coordinate this monthly series where we feature an author who's recently published a book on Island Press that features issues related to PFAS and polyfluoroalkyl substances, Forever Chemicals, and partner them with someone who can speak about the issues in their book from another perspective. So today that's me. Lucky me, I get to share the stage with Sharon here. I wanted to let you know that Island Press has generously offered a 30% discount on Sharon's book. So if you go to the Island Press website and use the discount code DEFEND, DEFEND, all caps, you'll get a discount purchasing her book. Sharon is going to speak first today. Then I will follow up and speak a little bit about my work with PFAS impacts to farmland. And then at the end of our session, we'll have a Q&A period. At any point during the presentation, you can put your questions into the Q&A field, and then we'll get to them at the end of the session. So please, as you think of questions, drop them in the chat or into the Q&A rather. And if you think of it, tag who you'd like to answer your question, me or Sharon. So all that being said, I'd like to introduce you to Sharon Udasin. Sharon was the 2022 recipient of the SEAL Environmental Journalism Award. She covers U.S. West climate and policy issues for The Hill from her home base in Colorado. And she's recently the author of Poisoning the Well, How Forever Chemicals Contaminated America, published through Island Press. Sharon, welcome. We're so glad to have you here and excited to hear your presentation.
Thank you very much for that really lovely introduction. I will start sharing my screen, assuming I do that correctly right now. Hold on. That is right here. And PowerPoint. Have I done this correctly?
We can't see your screen yet.
I clicked share.
There it is.
Okay, so I will just go into our presentation mode. Can you all see the beginning of the presentation now?
Looks great. You're on the screen.
Okay, fantastic. So again, Adam had a very nice introduction, and this is Poisoning the Well, How Forever Chemicals Contaminated America. And I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to the PFAS issue and to the book itself. So I'm sure, like me, or like how I used to be, all of us sitting here, we don't necessarily account for every single ingredient we're about to put in our body when we're shopping in the grocery store, shopping at a clothes store, or even turning on our faucets. But today I want to just give you a glimpse of some cases in which people's trust in that system, in just not reading every single label, has been broken. And that is one of the most tragic environmental crises that is currently striking our planet. So first, I'm going to take you to Decatur, Alabama, and the small town next to it of Cortland. This is Cortland, a beautiful downtown area that I had the pleasure of experiencing myself more than 2 years ago now in March 2023, a really, really picturesque place. What I saw there was a historic southern town surrounded by sprawling greenery, a place that's home to one of the South's first railroads, and an area that has nearly 200 years of gorgeous architecture, ranging from the Victorian era to veranda-wrapped white picket fence cottages. But while I was there, what I also saw was a huge amount of death and devastation. Now, I'd like you to hear very briefly from PFAS activist Brenda Hampton, who took me on a tour of her town streets at that time. And here I was sitting directly next to her in the passenger seat of this car.
The father and the mother, the father and the son had died there. The next house, the mother died at. The next house coming down the street, husband and wife died. The next house was husband and wife. The next house was a female that died. Young girl died here in this house here. So service this house, the husband died and then he had renal failure. The wife is still alive in there. The lady that lived in there, she's dead.
So my co-author and I have come to call that Brenda's death tour of her small town of Cortland. And the thing about Brenda is that she's just a regular person who in 2015 underwent a routine checkup as part of a McDonald's managerial transfer from Boston to Tennessee. She was shocked to find that at her routine physical that tests were showing that she was in kidney failure and that she had been exposed to something toxic. Now, the thing is, what she told me is that she had not been exposed to anything toxic as far as she knew. She had been exposed to hamburgers and French fries, which some people might think is toxic, but not in this way. She was so startled, though, that she decided to move back to her hometown of Cortland, Alabama, instead of doing that transfer. And as you can see here on this map, there's Cortland and North Cortland. These are two tiny twin towns of just a few hundred people apiece. Now, Brenda was really curious, and she observed just how sick people were in both of the Cortlands. She found 54 cases of cancer and 14 of kidney failure in 2 streets alone. And once she realized that something called PFAS were wrecking the towns, Brenda decided to self-fund efforts to distribute supplies and drive her neighbors to medical appointments. Now, all Brenda and her neighbors were doing was something that you and I do every single day, as I mentioned earlier. They were trusting the tap. And Brenda, in addition to her kidney failure, she has hardly been spared, despite, taking care of all of these neighbors who are sick. She's had kidney failure, 2 heart attacks, and a stroke. And she and her neighbors ultimately found out that they had just been drinking their water, but it was contaminated by compounds known as PFAS. So what are PFAS? I'm sure most of the people listening know what they are, but I'll explain anyway. They are per and polyfluoral alkyl substances. It's an acronym for about 15,000 synthetic organofluorines. They're in many household items, such as waterproof fabrics, nonstick pans, and cosmetics, as well as certain types of firefighting foams, especially those previously used by the military. Now, I can't see you all because we're on Zoom, but I would venture a guess that every single one of us here is wearing something with PFAS in it right now, even if we tried not to do so. The water and stain resistant properties have made PFAS incredibly useful in medical devices, first responder gear, and in semiconductors. So these are compounds that have real utility and, in fact, in certain cases, life-saving utility. Well, that sounds great. So what's the problem? Well, they don't break down at all in the environment, and they linger in the human body, in some cases up to a few years, by binding to proteins in the blood of at least 97% of Americans. That's according to the CDC. They're linked to many cancers and kidney, thyroid, heart, reproductive, and immune issues. And downstream from discharges, as I saw in Decatur and Cortland, effects can be dire. And you'd think that with a situation so dire, we would have regulated these substances decades ago. But in fact, the EPA took decades to regulate just a few out of 15,000 and counting PFAS. They're forever and they're everywhere. So they weren't always. In fact, they were born accidentally in a lab in New Jersey called Deepwater in 1938, where postdoctoral scholar Roy Plunkett was working on hazardous refrigerant replacements for hazardous refrigerants. So to plunk it, this meant that he was storing very, very cold cylinders of tetrafluoroethylene gas. And he assumed that that TFE gas would stay a gas upon opening those cylinders. But when he did, he found a mysterious white powder. After conducting a lot of research, he discovered that the TFE had undergone a process called polymerization, in which carbon-carbon double bonds in a TFE break apart and attack others. The powder that formed as a result was heat resistant, and most things didn't stick to it. DuPont, the company he was working for, decided that this compound could be useful and trademarked it as poly-TFE, or PTFE Teflon, in 1944. Now, Teflon very, very quickly appealed to the US military, and it was heat resistant. It was an anti-corrosion, corrosive, and it didn't interact with other chemicals. So one of its first uses was to contain highly reactive materials like uranium in the making of the atom bomb. Really, Teflon only reached consumers thanks to an inventor across the world named Marc Gregoire. Gregoire started coating his own pans with Teflon and launched his own company, Tefal, in Rumilly, France in 1956. Tefal began exporting its products to the US in 1961 and was popularized in no small part thanks to a photograph taken of Jackie Kennedy purchasing one of the pans in Macy's in New York City, I believe. I just want to give you a quick look at one of the ads from the 1960s that gives you kind of an understanding of just how useful these chemicals were.
Ladies, no more scraping, no more grinding, no more pounding, no more scouring, no more problems, no more mess with new Slip Away. You just spray, bake, and slip away. Yes, here in this handy spray can is new Slip Away, the revolutionary new non-stick coating for pots, pans, ovens, and grills. And Slip Away contains the magic of DuPont Teflon. Just spray the surface of your cooking utensils, bake in the oven for 30 minutes, and your Slip Away non-stick surface will literally last for months.
So that was quite a shiny prospect, but not everything was as shiny as these pans appeared to be because there was a lot of toxicological research happening behind the scenes. Already by the 1950s, researchers inside and outside of DuPont had found that some people exposed to heated Teflon were developing flu-like effects, something called polymer fume fever. 1959, there was an FDA official who wrote that Teflon may be unstable under cooking temperatures and that some decomposition products are quite toxic. And yet, that same FDA went on to approve Teflon-coated cookware. By 1961, a toxicologist at DuPont wrote that some PFAS could cause liver enlargement in rats. And by 1978, another company, 3M, which was a major PFAS producer as well, found the compounds in the blood of its employees with fluorine levels proportional to the length of time they worked there and persisting in some for 15 to 20 years. Now, in 1981, 3M found something so problematic about one type of PFAS called PFOA that it decided it needed to alert the EPA, and that was a link to birth defects. The fetuses of rats had consumed PFOA developed eye deformities. But the alert also said that no human health problems have been observed. But soon, 3M started assessing what worker illnesses might mean if they occurred for its bottom line. And a 1984 memo's concerns cited employee health and corporate liability as possible issues. By 2000, 3M agreed to start phasing out the two most notorious types of PFAS, PFOS and PFOA, but kept producing many of their chemical cousins. Now, one place that 3M set up shop was along the Tennessee River, going back to Brenda Hampton's story in Cortland and Decatur. So there is 3M, and Cortland itself is situated downstream, despite how it looks that the Tennessee River is going up. That is actually downstream. And it's right next to the city of Decatur as well. So 3M opened the factory near in this region in 1961. By 1976, it had found one type of PFAS in a Decatur worker's blood, and then again in several employees in 1979. By the 90s, 3M scientists cited interest in possible health risks to workers regarding certain types of cancer, as well as endocrine and reproductive disorders. Now, the effects were also going beyond the factory bounds. By 1979, PFAS were found in fish caught in the river around Wheeler Dam and water utilities downstream from the plant. Now, this is Wheeler Dam. I took this picture and visited this dam in March 2023, and you could see that despite warnings about PFAS contamination, which very much exists today in this area, there were still people doing widespread fishing in this area. Now, by 2010, the EPA started taking tests itself after one company said that it had unknowingly discharged large amounts of PFAS into the Tennessee River. And 2014, the CDC's Toxic Registry Agency had taken community blood samples and found certain types of PFAS at levels 2 to 4 times higher than US averages. But many plants still line the Tennessee River today and are allowed to dump, although the EPA lists the areas impaired with at least one type of PFAS and agricultural materials. While these discharges are lawful, companies have at times violated their legal bounds, doing things like underreporting releases and breaching contracts. Brenda Hampton really describes this, the lay of the land here in this quote, and just how loose environmental regulations really are in Alabama. She says, "They are still taking advantage of Alabama. Nobody goes by any rules. Nobody questions anything." But it turns out that Brenda was questioning a lot of things, and she recruited a small cohort of fellow activists as well as scientists to her side. They've pushed through lawsuits, they've tested water, they've exposed injustices in the media. But Brenda, in doing so, has made herself an enemy of locals who rely on industry, because a lot of the industry is employing her neighbors, the very people that they are polluting. She said she was shot at, had 2 cars destroyed, and found that someone broke into her truck and left a cut-up Chucky doll. But her efforts had helped secure a settlement between 3M and her water utility for $35 million at that, which resulted in the distribution of small checks to affected residents, and it enabled the utility to build a reverse osmosis treatment plant pictured here. Now, residents of Cortland are able to receive PFAS-free water through their taps thanks to this settlement. And this was just the first of multiple settlements between 3M and residents of this area. And before concluding, I'm almost done with my portion of this. I just wanted to show you how 3M has and the other industries in the region have also really had an effect on the city of Decatur on land. So the effects are not just downstream in the river, they're also right here in the city just next door. Because 3M and the other industries have been a pillar in this city and a major employer. This is how the former city council president, Paige Beebe, put it. "Look at Decatur's history. Anything and everything we have, if it's to the hospital benefit or anybody, you look on the program, who is the platinum giver? 3M. But does any gift really come for free?" I want you to take a good look at these pictures over here, the demolition site. I will explain them in a second. So one population possibly paying the price for this gift would be teachers and students who attended Brookhaven Middle School from 1971 to 2018. The school was built atop a landfill that operated in the 1940s through the 1960s, and 3M has since admitted to dumping there for about a year during landfill operation. The school district ended up taking legal action and settled with 3M, which bought the site for $1.25 million, 2.6 times its property value, and then began demolition, as was pictured here. I was actually present with Pat, who I will introduce in a second, at the site during the demolition in March 2023. And just 8 months later, by November 2023, 3M said the green space is suitable for public use, although pre-demolition plans showed significant PFOS levels at test sites. And the Alabama Department of Environmental Management had very little response to provide to that statement. Now, just for a second, I'd like you to hear a statement from Pat Underwood, who's a graduate of Brookhaven Middle School, a world-renowned martial artist, and a former volunteer for Tennessee Riverkeeper. He is known locally as the Trash Ninja.
The school was built on a landfill. Like, it wasn't a hidden thing. Like, we all were in on it. And the joke that we all just subscribed to was that the school was sinking 3 inches or something a year. And that eventually, when we were old, in our 30s and 40s, like how old that was going to be, you know, like that, which isn't old, that the school was just going to sink into the ground. Little did we know that there was some serious industrial contaminants in that landfill.
Now, I'll just say he is about 40 at this point. So you see just some of the effects that occurred in the city of Decatur. And the city itself was also embroiled in a lawsuit with 3M and settled itself and the county and the utility with 3M for nearly $100 million, with $35 million funding a new recreation center in Decatur. But former council members maintain that those negotiations and the deal itself were flawed, in part due to ties between city leadership and industry. So you'll notice that $35 million, which seems like a lot, went to fund a new recreation center, but a lot of the former council members and activists in the region would have preferred that money go to do something about cleanup. And you can read in depth about the city council squabbles that have really occurred in this region. And I would just end with this one quote from Carl Cole, who's an environmental attorney. He said, 3M, I believe then and would believe now, knew they had most of the leaders of the county in their pocket, on their side. And we have plenty of responses, we had opportunities for responses from 3M in the book, just so you know. Their side is in there as well. But I would like to now pass the conversation on to Adam again, and he's going to tell you some more avenues of PFAS contamination, many of which are also featured in this book. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I really appreciate you sharing your research and storytelling with us. So powerful to hear about Brenda and Pat and to hear about that school. It's just heartbreaking and very angering. I really appreciate the way you're highlighting those community activists throughout your book. And if folks get a chance to pick up a copy of Sharon's book, you'll see that she really crisscrossed the country to highlight the way these chemicals have impacted communities across the country and very artfully lace those stories together. So thank you, and I hope folks will follow up and read the whole book. I will now share my screen here and take you guys on a little journey through an area of my work, which is PFAS in farmland. Cheery topic. So I like to start this presentation with this beautiful watercolor illustration of people living and working and fishing and farming and eating in a landscape. We all exist in a landscape. And when we think about environmental contaminants and poorly managed waste streams, it's helpful for me to ground myself in a sense that the contaminants are impacting us from multiple angles. Talking about PFAS in farmland is important to me because when PFAS lands on farmland, it poses significant economic risks to the farming community. The people who are closest to the contamination are at elevated risk of PFAS-linked illnesses such as kidney cancer, liver disease, thyroid disorders, and more. The contamination extends also to the rest of the farming community, farm workers who might be less able to advocate for themselves depending on their situation, farming families, the children, and spouses, and neighbors. PFAS doesn't respect property boundaries, so the whole community can be impacted. And then, of course, we all depend on a clean food system. We want farms to be clean so we can eat clean, healthy food. I'll introduce you to a few PFAS-impacted farmers by way of illustrating the broader problem. This is Earl Tennant, who famously sued DuPont together with the lawyer Rob Bellott for contamination that was emanating from a leaking landfill where DuPont was dumping PFAS-laden waste, like 3M had been doing similarly in Decatur on the site of that school. This was before any of us were talking about PFAS, before the regulators had begun to take action. Earl knew that there was something wrong. It was impacting his cattle. Ultimately, he himself died of cancer, but he knew that there was something wrong on his farm, and he raised the alarm. He was our first farmer whistleblower. And in many ways, it's thanks to his advocacy that any of us is now aware of the dangers of PFAS and is able to take action to protect ourselves in some ways from those threats. Heading now to Clovis, New Mexico. This is my friend Art Scott, who has Highland Dairy. He's located right next to the Cannon Air Force Base, where, like at many other military facilities and airports across the country, a PFAS-based firefighting foam called AFFF was used in large quantities, significantly contaminating groundwater resources. Being in the arid Southwest, Art and his neighbors are heavily dependent on irrigation to grow their crops and to supply their cows. And the contamination was so severe that Art had to euthanize his entire herd of dairy cows, almost 4,000 cows. Further up the Rocky Mountains, near Peterson Air Force Base, in a community that Sharon covers in her book. This is Susan Gordon and Patrick Hamilton, who ran a farm located next to the Air Force Base that was forced to close. She lost her employment, lost her health insurance, and her family was exposed to the chemicals when the farm closed following the discovery of the contamination. Here in Maine, another local hero covered in Poisoning the Well. This is Fred Stone, Maine's farmer whistleblower. Fred Stone's Stone Ridge Farm was the first PFAS-impacted farm identified in our state back in 2016. And at the time, our state government tried to pin the problem on Fred and suggest that the problem was isolated to his farm. But Fred, like Earl Tennant, understood that there was a broader problem and pushed the media, pushed our state regulators, pushed our legislators to engage and investigate the broader problem. And it's thanks to him that other PFAS-impacted farmers like myself have been able to identify the problem and in some ways mitigate their ongoing exposure. Thank you, Fred Stone. This is Tim Christensen, who I purchased my farm from. He was an organic vegetable farmer who received a terminal pancreatic cancer diagnosis in 2014 after living on formerly sludge spread land. The spreading happened 4 years before he bought the property in the early 1990s. And here's a picture of me before I had any gray hair, standing next to my wife right after we purchased the farm from Tim, and put up our farm sign, posed for a photo that we posted on Instagram, cheerful, looking bright into the future. But 7 years after we purchased this property, we learned, as a result of the Department of Environmental Protection investigation that stemmed from Fred Stone's efforts together with Defend Our Health, where I now work, the state had mapped the historic sludge spreading locations, and we learned that, something we didn't know about happened on our property. We need to investigate. The contamination was quite severe. It impacted my family, it impacted my employees, my friends, many of our crops, and ultimately we needed to close down the business and move off site. In Michigan, the Grostic Cattle Company, based in Teresa Grostic and their kids, likewise impacted by historic sludge spreading. This is sewage sludge, the semi-solid waste product from the wastewater treatment process that has impacted Brett's farm, my farm, and Jason and Teresa's farm. So these are sad stories. Are they sad stories in isolation, or do they illustrate a broader problem? This question really begs further investigation. So across the country, there are more than 4,000 farms that have received notifications from the Department of Defense that they may be at risk. The DoD has data on groundwater contamination, and the numbers are startling. PFAS levels in groundwater under those military bases and airports are up to 1.7 million times higher than the recently enacted safe drinking water limit. Really terribly toxic water that people are drinking, farmers are being have to irrigate with and have to supply their livestock with. The DoD is not providing any resources to help farmers with that contamination. And then estimates of sludge spread land vary between 20 million acres and 70 million acres, but it's a significant percentage of American cropland that's been licensed to be treated with sewage sludge. And like those facilities in Decatur that Sharon spoke about, there are industrial facilities that are manufacturing or using PFAS in rural communities that are putting other farms at risk. This is a depressing topic. It's distressing. What can we do about it? Fortunately, we still have agency. We can speak to our regulators. We can speak to our legislators. We can work in our communities to protect the places and the resources that we love and depend on. And some of the ways that at Defend Our Health, we're trying to protect farmers, farming communities, and the food system from these chemicals are turning off the tap all the way upstream. Let's get PFAS out of commercial products. Across the country, let's push state legislators to test sludge for PFAS, to either ban sludge spreading outright or set health protective levels on which sludge can contain only a low threshold protecting human health. We need to investigate the historic impacts of sludge-based contamination. And then we need state and federal supports for communities that are suffering from the historic impacts of PFAS where sludge has been spread and where AFFF has been used. So again, thank you for being part of this webinar today. I ask you to remember that this issue, it's not abstract. While it is complex, we can't see it, we can't smell PFAS, we can't taste it, but it's real, it's impacted real people, continues to impact real people. So thank you for engaging. Read Sharon's book. We've got time for a quick Q&A here. And keep fighting with us. Let's get these chemicals out of our economic life, out of our homes, and off of our farms. And I'm just going to quickly, let's see here, get over to the Q&A. So Sharon, can I pitch the first question to you? Someone in the Q&A was interested in the reverse osmosis system that you mentioned. And someone asks, does reverse osmosis take PFAS out of water?
So yes, it does. There are three main types of technologies that remove PFAS from drinking water, and that is one of them. And it does so pretty effectively on either a municipal level, or you can get home systems that do it as well. There are a couple issues with reverse osmosis. In one big one is that it consumes so much water and requires a lot of energy. So in a place like the US West, they are hesitant to use that technology for PFAS removal for an interesting reason. I don't know if you guys know about Western water rights, but first in time, first in right. If you take water out of the system and you are not a first priority user, you have to put it back in. So in Colorado, for example, they're using another system called ion exchange to remove PFAS. There is a third type of technology called granular activated carbon, which removes a lot of PFAS, but now they're seeing that some of the very small, tiny replacement PFAS, which are called ultra short chain PFAS, may be slipping through that type of filtration. But I will emphasize that while all those technologies remove PFAS, they don't destroy them. Really, right now, they make them someone else's problem, a toxic waste dump's problem. However, I'll just end that answer with a brief bit of hope. There are scientists currently across the world and startups that are actually effectively breaking these compounds down. So some hope is on the horizon.
Thanks, Sharon. The next question is, how can activists help with prevention? We can't keep chasing manufacturers after the fact. Why can't companies with new tech be subject to testing before they unleash technology for profit?
Do you want me to, or you, or both?
Yeah, why don't you go first, and then I'll
let you take the next one on the agricultural pesticides that I see.
Sounds great.
I mean, well, there's a few reasons, because a lot of it happens because of federal regulation. For example, there have been various loopholes that have been used throughout certain administrations. Like there's one where new PFAS have been approved via a loophole that allows looser review for chemicals produced in small quantities. There's also some things might be grandfathered in from before a 1976 change to those are not the new ones, but that's why we still have some fairly toxic things from a while ago in the water. But yeah, I will just say that state to state regulation, sometimes states have tighter regulations than like one versus another. But that also brings up another issue here, an environmental justice issue, in which if you live in one state, you might have superior environmental regulations to another. So it kind of depends who you are and where you live, whether you have access to cleaner water. If you want to add to that.
I'm sorry, I was getting distracted by the Q&A feed while you were talking there. Yeah, I think I have to. I wasn't listening. I apologize.
I think I pretty much covered that one. So why don't you go to the
Yeah.
agricultural pesticides one, because I feel like that's your area of
Let's see.
I can read the question out loud if you want.
Oh, I've got well, someone asks, what are the alternatives you propose for sludge spreading? And I would just say that so sewage sludge, as I didn't go into great depth as to what sewage sludge is or what the problems are, but sewage sludge is one of two terminal end products of the wastewater treatment process. The other being effluent, which is the water that's been cleaned up as the solids or the sludge itself has been removed from that water, which then the effluent gets just discharged into our surface waters, and the solids have been marketed to farmers as a quote unquote beneficial reuse of a waste product since the Clean Water Act passed in the 1970s. But the problem is we don't have a clear understanding of what goes into our waste stream. So sewage sludge, also known as biosolids, does contain nutrients that can help plants grow. It can contain any number of toxic chemicals, some of which we're testing for, some of which we're perhaps not even aware of yet, as industry moves faster than regulators and moves faster than the scientific community. So the base of the food system is not, unfortunately, a safe place to put sewage sludge. It can be dried, it can be landfilled, and those processes in the landfill can be better managed, better contained than contamination seeping through a farm. And I think we have time for one more question. Sharon, to you, what do you think we can do to ensure effective regulation of PFAS with Trump's degraded EPA?
Oh, that's a huge question. And just to explain where we're at with that, because people might not know, April 2024, the Biden administration actually regulated 6 types of PFAS. Again, it's only 6 out of 15,000, but it's something. And in May 2025, so just a month ago, the Trump administration, EPA, said that it would be rescinding and reconsidering limits on 4 of the 6 PFAS. But it's going to be maintaining the limits for PFOA and PFOS, which are the 2 legacy PFAS that have been deemed carcinogens by like global health organizations, like already now for a while. But it is extending compliance on those 2, allowing water utilities to basically be in violation until 2031 instead of 2029. Now, it's really, really up in the air as to what's going to happen for the other 4 PFAS. The EPA administrator said there's a possibility that at the end of this process, a new number could be lower, it could be higher. He says he just wants to follow the science. It's really, really uncertain. I'm kind of just as uncertain as all of you are as to what we can do, unfortunately, because I feel like things are very unpredictable. The thing about the EPA administrator, though, is that he is from a very PFAS contaminated area of Long Island, and he has previously pledged to take care of this issue. So I guess one answer would be is that people can write to him about it, and it's a personal issue in his neighborhood.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks for answering that one and for your presentation. Thanks for your book. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to listen. We haven't gotten through all the Q&A, but we'll try to follow up with additional answers.
I'm happy to receive any questions by email if you want to. You can post my Gmail, my Sharon Udasin at gmail.com if anybody wants to write.
Fantastic. We'll include that in a follow-up email. Remember that we're also going to be sending out a link to Sharon's book with the discount code, which is DEFEND, DEFEND, all caps. That gets you a 30% discount on the purchase of the book. Also, as I mentioned, this is part of a monthly webinar series. The next book talk is on July 15th at 1 p.m. Island Press author Christina Marasek is going to be speaking about her book, A War on Cancer, together with Maine's Dr. Rachel Criswell, who is a family physician who combines clinical care with pioneering research on PFAS. It'll be a really good conversation. So I hope you come back for that one.
Rachel is also in this book, so Rachel Criswell.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Sharon. Thanks for everybody joining in and spending your afternoon with us. And we'll get back to you on email. Bye.